Good morning. Thank you for joining us on Morning Rush. We're following breaking news this morning. The big story of the day, WNBA star Brittney Griner is coming home on her way as we speak.
Yeah, really big news. She's been detained in Russia since February on charges of drug possession.
Yeah, big breaking news since we've been on the air. No one saw this coming today. It's been off the radar for a little bit, but obviously a lot going on behind the scenes. Again, Brittney Griner released today as part of a prisoner swap. Earlier this year, of course, she was arrested there in Russia. She was there as part of her, playing basketball, and on her way back home, officials in Russia found vape pens and cannabis oil in her luggage. Well, she was then arrested, of course, ultimately sentenced to serve 9 years behind bars at a Russian penal colony, no less. Well, since then, U.S. officials have been demanding her return home. Lots of negotiation, but little success until, of course, we got the big announcement this morning. Obviously, a lot has happened in the last several days and weeks. The news so big, in fact, President Biden addressed the country and held a press conference just a few minutes ago. Listen.
These past few months have been hell for Brittney and for Charlie and her entire family and all her teammates back home. People all across the country have learned about Brittney's story, advocated for her release, stood with her throughout this terrible ordeal. And I know that support meant a lot to her family. I'm glad to be able to say that Brittney's in good spirits. She's relieved to finally be heading home. And the fact remains that she's lost months of her life, experienced a needless trauma, and she deserves space, privacy, and time.
The trade agreed upon today involved international arms dealer Viktor Bout. Bout was being held in federal prison after he was arrested by the Drug Enforcement Agency in 2008. He was convicted of conspiring to kill Americans and was serving a 25-year sentence at a prison in Illinois.
Now, we should note here, it's a very important note, the Griner for Bout exchange does not include retired U.S. Marine Paul Whelan in prison in Russia. He had been in Russian custody for nearly 4 years. Out of 16 years he was sentenced. He was convicted on espionage charges that the U.S. has called false.
Indeed, and President Biden made note of that specifically today, saying Russia is simply treating his case differently, but that America will not give up on its efforts to get him home, as well, acknowledging his family must have very mixed feelings about the news today. As you may have seen there in that soundbite, not just the president speaking today, but also Griner's wife moments ago saying, for she is happy that her wife now is literally in the air on the way back to the U.S., but she still feels, of course, a lot of sympathy for the Whelan family and other families, of course, dealing with what she had to go through for the past nearly 10 months.
Today my family is whole, but as you all are aware, there's so many other families who are not whole. And so BG's not here to say this, but I will gladly speak on her behalf and say that BG and I will remain committed to the work of getting every American home, including Paul, whose family is in our hearts today. As we celebrate BG being home, we do understand that there are still people out here who are enduring what I endured the last 9 months of missing tremendously their loved ones.
And just on a personal note, her wife, Sherelle, also saying that her #1 emotion today was, quote, sincere gratitude for everything the administration did to make this moment possible. And toward the end just said, I'm just going to smile right now as she awaits her wife's return back here to U.S. soil.
Must be the longest amount of hours of whatever flight it is from UAE, however long that is. That has to be the longest amount of time for her just waiting for Brittney. Let's go to Stuart Smith. He's in Moscow with the latest developments. Stuart, we talked just a few minutes ago, and like Rob mentioned, we did not know this was going to happen. This is something that has been really tightly under wraps for a long time. The last that we knew was that Brittney was sent to a penal colony. We knew that she had been there for the last few weeks at least, but not knowing where her exact location was, and there was a lot of back and forth about that. But what are you hearing on the ground in Moscow about the swap and the negotiations as a whole? Because Brittney's wife, Sherelle, mentioned, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes things and people that had their hands in this.
Yeah, let's start off with then what's happened over the last few weeks, because indeed it did go quiet. We didn't, for example, know exactly which prison Brittney Griner was being held in the region of Russia, which is well known for its prisons. We knew she was there, but we didn't know which one. On top of that, looking at back at previous statements from officials, the last we heard was from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov this time last week. At the time then, he said that intelligence services of the United States and Russia were actively discussing the situation and hoped for some kind of resolution soon. But that's not an unusual statement from the Russian Foreign Ministry. The last we heard from the United States here in Moscow, the top diplomat here at the moment, was that Russia, as late as the 28th of November, so not the Monday gone before, but the Monday before that, on the 28th of November, Russia had not provided a serious response. So whether this constitutes now a serious response or whether this is a backing down of some kind by one of the sides, we just don't know, of course, because we weren't in the room. But initially, there had been a lot of talk amongst the United States and Russia about exactly this swap, a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-1, and it was always Brittney Griner's name that was mentioned, as well as Viktor Bout. So it's not clear what had to change to get us here. One thing that has happened over the last few weeks is the United States has made it slightly easier for the Russian embassy in the United States to work. There have been massive problems for years, to be honest, with the way that the embassies in both countries are struggling to work under tough geopolitical conditions. So perhaps that was relevant. But in terms of actually, obviously what's changed, it's not clear.
And, you know, Paul Whelan, we mentioned, also deemed wrongfully detained by the White House, not included in this deal. So what do we know about his situation there right now?
Yeah, that's right. Well, his lawyer has spoken earlier today, and the lawyer believes that discussions are continuing about his possible exchange. So like the US President Joe Biden said, he hasn't been forgotten in all of this. Indeed, there is a difference between the charges levied against them. One relates to espionage, the other drug smuggling, you know, quote. In all of these matters, this is what the Russian Justice Ministry has decided to go with. So there's a difference in the level of the charge, and there's also a difference in the amount of attention, of course. So Brittney Griner has received the majority of attention, especially over the last year, because, of course, her imprisonment was new, and she is more, as an international basketball player, more famous. And so for the people involved in this discussion, she was a bigger fish, quote, for the two sides. Similarly, Viktor Bout, a Russian citizen who the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here has been trying to get for many years, he was the obvious candidate for some kind of prisoner swap.
And Stuart, I don't want to dampen the moment, because our country should be celebrating the fact that Brittney Griner is on her way home after all these months of what she has endured. But looking at this objectively, I would imagine that Russia considers this to be a win on two fronts. One, as we've been talking about, Paul Whelan not a part of this deal, charged with a more serious crime of espionage. But number two, we are getting back someone who was charged with what we would see in this country as an extraordinarily minor crime involving cannabis, while Russia is getting back someone who was serving a 25-year sentence in Illinois for conspiring to kill Americans. In terms of crimes, this is not an equal swap at all. Russia will play this as a win, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed, Russia and is playing it as a win. That's what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says. They are painting this as there have been discussions for an incredibly long time, but Washington has finally backed down in this step. Also, the Russian ombudsman here has been calling this a New Year's gift, New Year being the main celebration here, effectively a Christmas present, and saying that for Viktor Bout, this is the outcome of many years of discussion and one which rectifies a massive injustice. Remember, the Kremlin here says that he was imprisoned on baseless and biased reasons. So it is indeed being painted as a win for Russia. In terms of equating the two crimes, Russia would say that she was sentenced as per Russian law, that she was involved not just in smuggling but also of possession, and the prosecutor always said that they did not believe this was an unintentional move. So all of that adding up to her eventual sentence. Of course, her defense said it's unprecedented for this amount of cannabis, which was so small, for the fact that she pleaded guilty early on, and also for the fact that there were major issues with the way she was detained. It was a highly unusual sentence, and that's why throughout all of this the US called it a politically motivated trial and detention.
And, we saw President Biden saying she showed, quote, grit and dignity in that trial in Russia. The White House had said this was a top priority, and we've heard dribbles about the negotiations over the past months about this. At times it seemed more strained. At times it seemed like there was cautious optimism. We know Russia last week indicated that a deal may be possible. So are there any indications on the timing of this? What was the factor that made the release possible now? Or is that something we're really not going to ever know here?
Yeah, I would note that the last we heard from the foreign minister was that it was US and Russian intelligence services that were debating her status, which to me means that indeed the ultimate reason for this release may be something that is highly classified. We're not just talking about the diplomatic stuff, although perhaps that was relevant. I mean, the embassy disputes between Russia and the United States. If it was intelligence officials that were meeting, not necessarily from any kind of the presidential administration or the foreign ministries or the Secretary of State in the United States, perhaps then there's more going on that we will simply not, at least yet, be privy to. Certainly for Russia's part, the secrecy has been intense, and that was when the negotiations broke down. They got at their worst when all of this international pressure came from the United States and other countries too. And that was when Russia effectively shut down and said, if discussions are going to happen, they need to happen behind the scenes. If there's this continued scrutiny of these discussions and continued speculation, then nothing's going to work out, which is why then it went silent for the last few months on the whole, and perhaps why ultimately this did manage to be achieved.
And that's a fascinating point you make about intelligence officials and all of this, because you can't ignore the context here, and that this prisoner swap is happening at a time when the U.S. and Russia are very much at odds, to put it mildly, because of the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Do you think the dynamics related to the war played a role in this somehow, or is that even possible?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. There were, for example, Russia does try to make tries to distinguish between its various areas of foreign policy. So on the recent failed negotiations on nuclear weapons, it got that far because Russia said it wanted to differentiate the need for a nuclear weapons treaty from the ongoing conflict, which, bear in mind, Russia does consider effectively a proxy war against the United States. It believes that the US is fighting a proxy war through Ukraine against Russia to ultimately destroy it. So it's high-level stakes in the minds of Russian politicians. That's what's told to Russian people. And so that was differentiated when it came to nuclear weapons. But they said that fell down because the United States failed to take into account the broader geopolitical issues, meaning that, indeed it does, as hard as the US and Russia try to differentiate issues, of course, the larger geopolitics and also trust, which is so massively important in these international negotiations, trust wasn't there for that. So something changed, either related to trust or about what sides felt they could gain from a prisoner swap. And that seems to be it. But unfortunately, we just don't know what exactly that was. And maybe someone will tell us.
All right. Well, we do know Brittney Griner on her way home on a flight now, which is great news, especially for her wife, who has been waiting eagerly for her return. Stuart Smith live in Moscow reporting. Of course, we're monitoring this developing story, so we'll bring you any updates that we get as they come in.